Hi everyone, Rick the Grimes Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Scott Walker and Sunn record, Soused. Soused is the completely unexpected collaborative album from experimental music figureheads Scott Walker and Sunn, both of whom come from different musical backgrounds, both of whom come from different musical worlds, though they are very dark and experimental worlds. However, their respective pasts have very little in common. Walker has been the passionate and bellowing voice behind many fantastic Baroque pop records decades ago. And Greg Anderson and Stephen O'Malley of Sunn, their background ranges from metal to hardcore punk. However, both of them are making incredibly strange music now. Currently, and for years, Sunn has been a major figurehead in the doom drone metal world, sort of taking the heavy, vast, somewhat ambient archetypes set out by bands like Earth on the record Earth 2, but taking it so much further into the dark ambient realm, into the noise realm, into the black metal realm. And Scott Walker went off of the artistic deep end in the 90s with the record Tilt. Then he went on to put out The Drift, and most recently, Bish Bosh, a record where Scott's very strange and deep croons are delivered over some of the strangest instrumentals he's dealt with yet. Some of the instrumentals here are very minimal and sparse and eerie. Others are incredibly cacophonous and busy and disorienting, dissonant, harsh, frantic, and intense. And as far as the lyrics on Bish Bosh go, they're absolutely absurd. Absurdism to the highest degree. Without a doubt, there are plenty of dark and disturbing moments on this record, sonically and verbally as well, but there are some tongue-in-cheek spots too. Some people have tried to boil this record down to Scott simply messing about, and maybe that is what he's doing to a degree, but if you think about what messing about kind of entails, no boundaries, no rules, no inhibitions, and Scott took advantage of that lack of boundaries in a way that I think no artist ever could or ever will. Even though Bish Bosh is not a welcoming record, it's not an incredibly rewarding record, it is awe-inspiringly twisted and bizarre. And even though Sunn makes music in a completely different genre, I would say those labels also apply to some of their best records too, which personally is enough common ground for me. Because once I heard this collaboration announced, I had no reason not to be excited. In my head, I sort of visualized like another Black One, where Sunn bring on Scott Walker and sort of have him mucked into their typically heavy and dissonant and thick instrumentals with just Scott going absolutely insane. Or maybe even Sunn drifting away from the drones and trying to come up with instrumentation that would complement Scott in a way that the instrumentation on Bish Bosh did, but with sort of a different tone or style. In my head, no way could this record be as underwhelming as the recent Ulver collaboration, because it's just too unforeseen. And it's not like Sunn and Scott Walker have so little common ground that this thing could be as disastrous as, like, Lulu. Socially speaking anyway, because I like some tracks off of Lulu. So even though I went into this record with nothing but just positive vibes and a good outlook and just somewhat high expectations, I came out just like sort of underwhelmed. Maybe that was bound to happen just because of how high of a regard I hold these two artists in. First, I guess I'll start with something that is very obvious from the sound of the record and was kind of confirmed for me in the way this album has been billed and marketed. For one, this LP comes out on Scott Walker's label, currently 4AD, and Scott Walker does get first billing. If Sunn is playing second fiddle on this record, it certainly sounds like it. Occasionally there are some ear-piercing guitar leads here and there. Who knows if that is coming from Stephen or Greg. Really, where Sunn's presence is felt are in the occasional appearances of thick, heavy, drony walls of guitar sound, Sunn's MO, essentially. The sad thing is, these thick walls of guitar don't actually enhance Scott Walker's shtick, which doesn't really change that significantly on this new record. In my opinion, these walls of droning guitar sound kind of tame when compared to Sunn's best material, which leads me to the question that if Scott Walker is running the show here, essentially, Why isn't this weirder? I did not love Head Over Heels Bish Bosh at the time that I reviewed it, at the time it came out. It has grown on me a little since then, but the appeal for me in this record is that it is a musical freak show. And while freak shows are great, their appeal does run a little one-dimensional. Not to say that there aren't interesting lyrics or emotions or musical compositions on this record. There most definitely are. But more often than not, they work to enhance this record's sense of shock value. And when so much of what you're doing banks on oddity, you've always got to work to advance beyond what you did in the past, or else it's just going to feel less shocking. It's going to be less gripping. And I just can't help but feel as I'm listening to these mere 5 songs that Scott Walker could have just done these songs on his own. Outside of Sunn's guitars, instrumentally, these tracks just feel like another round of Bish Bosh style strangeness, but not as strong, not as disorienting, not as extreme, because certainly when the droning guitars sort of introduce themselves, the compositional side of these tracks sort of end up stagnating and not really going anywhere that significant. Though I do think there are exceptions, such as the song Fetish, which most definitely has one of the most interesting progressions of any track on this album. Not only that, but Sunn's input on this record feels so much less obvious than it does on many other songs here. And the track Lullaby, though repetitive, does stay consistently twisted and engaging, especially as the horror movie synthesizers and Scott's upper register come together for some pretty interesting climaxes. Meanwhile, the tracks off of Bish Bosh thrived on change and unpredictability. I can't help but feel like I'm just listening to lesser versions of what I just heard Scott Walker do. There are some moments in this record that stand out, like the chorus vocals on Lullaby when Scott is singing out just very eerily, very creepily, the glistening synths or guitars right at the start of the opening track here. One moment in particular where Scott is sort of throwing these very primal drums behind Sunn's droning guitars. It actually comes together pretty well and has a bit of an industrial vibe on here. And no track on this record is outright awful, except maybe for the second one, which does border on just being dreadfully boring at points. But outside of that, there's not really that much appeal for me on this record. It doesn't feel like Scott is pushing himself artistically in the way that he was on his last record, and Sunn a lot of the time just kind of feels like background dressing. This collaboration is more exciting in name than it is in execution. I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this record, unfortunately. Transition, if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Forever. Also, down there in the description box, I will drop a link to a review of the new Royal Blood album. You can watch it down there at that link a week before it actually shows up on this channel over here. Cool? Cool. You're the best. You're the best. You're the best.